Okay, everybody, let's get started. Hopefully I have a few more people joining us to walk through this journey that I have gone through over the last 2 years. Maybe last 6 to 8 months has been the big part of it, but it's been about a 2-year journey to improve user authentication experience. An agenda of what we'll go through here. Effectively, we have a journey. So at the end of the day, you've got a starting point, some problems, and a solution. So they're sprinkled in throughout all of that is kind of tips and tricks and lessons learned that I went through. And I truly hope that some of you can benefit from these some of the issues that we faced, and you can take them back to your shops. So Cimpress, you may not have heard of this company. It's a $1.5 billion Dutch company located in Venlo. We have over 17 million unique customers and over 6,000 employees worldwide. From a brand perspective, that may have a little more, be a little more tangible to all of you. Vistaprint was the original company that started everything. In the last few years, we've acquired a lot of other ones, and you can see the brands up there. Most of those that you'll see are European-based, but at the end of the day, it's a family of companies. So SAP specifically, so the journey of how SAP was brought into the Cimpress environment started in 2008 with an HR implementation. A year later, supply chain and finance. And then 2010 all the way until now is what most SAP shops do is roll out more functionality, enhancements, upgrades to EHP6, warehouse management, you name it. There's any given day, there's probably 10 projects going on to enhance the solution. I'd say overall it's not a big environment in terms of number of applications, the business suite or ERP being the big one. We do have a portal system for the employee self-service and manager self-service, BPC, solution manager, and a few cloud applications. On the user side, again, not overly big. It's just under 1,000 SAP GUI users, and because of the self-service, we have the 6,000 accounts in the portal. And we do have some scanner users because we have a manufacturing environment, so there's some shop floor functionality as well. So that you understand the journey, it's good to understand who's talking to you, and so that you appreciate where I'm coming from. I got involved in the IT world back in the early 90s, more on the development side, so custom building applications. Around 97, I don't actually remember how this happened, but I got I guess put onto an SAP environment. I was given the task of go install this thing, and it's called 22F, and figure it out. So I think somehow I struggled and made my way through it. I think one of the ways I did that was actually at TechEd, because I think, if I remember correctly, the first TechEd was in 97 in Atlanta, and there's probably 300 or 400 people at it. So I guess it's pretty exciting for me personally because I've never been presenting, so it's a neat thing to share this with you guys. But specifically, my experience has been very much core basis. So installs, upgrades, performance tuning, that core thing you think of when you think of the basis world. That led all the way through 2009 when I started at Cimpress. At the time, that was Vistaprint, though, as I mentioned earlier. But one thing I definitely want you to take away is that I was not, by any means, an authentication expert. For the most part, I would say people had an ID and password in the SAP system. It's just the way it was, and people seemed to accept it. No one complained too much. And as a basis person, I didn't really feel, I guess there wasn't that much pressure on me to solve that problem. There was a minor tangent with a SAML implementation with Portal, but for the most part, ID and password, have a nice day. So therein lies the background, and now we'll get started with the journey. So in the beginning, as with most things were simple and the problems were few. We had a implementation of single sign-on by way of the Microsoft NTLM library. There's a particular OSS note number 352295 that tells you exactly what to do to make that happen. So the Cimpress or Vistaprint environment was Microsoft-based, so we were able to follow the steps and have a nice day. Our users didn't have IDs and passwords, so as a basis person, I came into this situation thinking, this is great. No one needs to have their password reset. Great deal. From time to time, though, users would get this very strange message that said S. I have a feeling that it probably was a truncated version of SNC, although I had never really took the time to figure that out. Usually, that was a reboot of the person's workstation, and you're off to the races again. So not a big deal. No real problems. On the portal side, we did have, just as a reference point, because we'll talk about this later, our portal environment was connected to Active Directory through the LDAP connector. The reason there being is we didn't want to have, since it's HR data, we didn't want to have sensitive situation where someone could walk up to a person's computer where the screensaver may not be on, and they could just single sign on all the way through. So we had a prompt for AD credentials. So that's kind of the beginning phases. Just as a show of hands with everybody in the room, about how many people have, I guess, either heard of or have used NTLM in your environments for single sign-on? So it looks like about 5 or 6 with the group here anyway, maybe 10. So we now get into the journey. So there's certainly problems that started to creep in the 2010 and even into today. And that leads to a need to eventually take action and fix these problems. And then that in the last 6 to 9 months has been an implementation to actually roll a product out to solve all these issues. So those problems, there's going to be 4 that we're going to talk about. I'll call them gaps. The first one was hardware. So I think I mentioned a few minutes ago we implemented warehouse management. So our shop floor folks were using these handheld scanners that were accessing the ERP system via HTTP. So these scanners, however, were not joined to a Windows domain. So from an authentication perspective, the person got this tiny little screen, and they had to use this little stylus or whatever, or these little small key, number pads and alphabet pads to push their ID and password in. Very painful in general. But more importantly, those passwords that they were putting in had to be SAP passwords because they were having authentication natively on the device. So that led to users' frustration because at the end of the day, they had a network password for some applications and SAP password for this particular warehouse management functionality. That was exacerbated because the support team for SAP that might provide password resets was located in Boston, and we have a global user base. You have people in Australia, Europe, they're waiting for potentially 12 to 24 hours to get their password reset. So that was resolved with the global help desk, but point being we had user issues with password resets. So as any good basis person would do, we try to find a way to solve for those, maybe 40 to 50 number of people who tried to figure out a way to work through those. I looked into whether we could redirect this warehouse management functionality through the portal and have it use Active Directory for authenticating. I also considered SAML since it is HTTP. Either one of those to me seemed overly complicated. You certainly have to have another thing involved in this warehouse management application. So whether that's a Java stack on the portal side to worry about at the end of the day. You've got the SAML configuration with certificates and all that business. And ADFS, which is the Active Directory Federation Services, that would provide the identity provider functionality. That was, at the time, was pretty new to our environment, and I wasn't comfortable that our AD team had enough experience to support that from a 24/7 environment. So I didn't pursue anything. But again, just to give you a picture of where we are on the journey, we only have about 50 people that are, I guess I'll use the word suffering at this point. So. Moving forward, so we had a hardware situation with these devices, and now we go into the software side. We rolled out some functionality called Easy DMS. I don't know if some of you may have heard of this, but it's a document management software from SAP, and it has a client piece that hooks into Windows Explorer, so you can do check-in and check-out of documents. In our case, it was R&D and engineering schematics, and of course, we quickly ran into the situation where the Easy DMS product doesn't support NTLM, and so therefore, guess what? More SAP passwords. Again, I'll stress the number of people, even though the graphic looks like it's an army. The reality is at this point we have that 50 or so people and growing on the shop floor, and then we had about 5 people using Easy DMS. So again, not a huge burning platform. Just a few months ago, so it's a little bit from a timeline perspective off, we did purchase WinShuttle. They support SSO, but not, again, with NTLM. We're looking at NetWeaver Business Client, SAP Fiori, some of the newer client software applications. And so NTLM is probably not the best choice if it's even supported at all. So rewind the clock about 2 years from even probably today, I happened to be at TechEd. And I was out at the floor and just talking to different software providers, and I came to learn about CyberSafe. So they have a product for authentication, single sign-on, and I think they even may have demoed some stuff about kind of shop floor and kind of devices like that. So I was intrigued, but again, I didn't have this huge business case to take it forward to management to say we need to buy something and we need to investigate this. But in the back of my mind, I knew there was at least something out there. Okay, so gap number 3, there's a total of 4 of these, by the way, is with Cimpress growing and acquiring these companies, that you saw that slide earlier with all the brands, not all of them had a very good, I guess it's a security environment, so policies and procedures and all the good stuff that goes with being a secure operation. So our information security folks, they implemented a gold standard of security to help kind of educate for the most part, but also implement a lot of standards. So from a SAP perspective, I kind of took a look in the mirror to see what our environment had running. And you look into it pretty quickly and you see we've got passwords being entered in the GUI, which creates user frustration. But then, oh, by the way, those passwords are being sent as clear text. So if you've got sniffers or bad people in the environment, which hopefully we don't have, but if you did, they could sniff those passwords. But a much bigger problem is NTLM. So I have a couple of quotes here from Microsoft and SAP, respectively. NTLM is effectively an aging, and I don't know if the right word might be dead protocol, but you can see there Microsoft effectively tells you don't use it anymore. So that was a bit of a wake-up call. And on the conversely, on the SAP side, they're not supporting, from a development perspective, you can still run it, but they're not going to enhance it or change it to any bugs or any kind of defects that might come from it. So that's number 3 of 4. So again, kind of going back to that mergers and acquisition, we're buying a lot of companies. Our Active Directory environment was evolving as well. So for many, many, many years, we had one domain, the Vistaprint domain. Just about a year or so ago, we realized that in order to grow and be kind of more, I guess, flexible, we initiated a process to have a top-level Cimpress domain, followed by subdomains for these different business units that are coming into the family, as it were. So, I think the high level would be we needed a very flexible way to run SAP in that top-level SAP domain, but yet have user accounts coming in from various other subdomains. So it just basically needed flexibility. So you add all that together, and I realized we got to do something. So that something meant first kind of looking around the landscape of potential solutions, and that memory I had of a year and a half before this point, that CyberSafe seemed to have a pretty good solution to most of the issues. I re-engaged with them and come to find out that as I throw all these different scenarios at them, the answer was, not only was it, yes, we can handle it, but I think what I really wanted to stress at this point anyway in this journey is that when I would ask about a particular scenario, the answer was yes, but also what you need to know is if I would ask about A, they would tell me about B and C before I even knew it was a problem. So it was pretty impressive to see how they were not just trying to sell a software, but trying to sell a solution to make sure that holistically I was in a better place. Obviously, they cover our use cases, and I was particularly intrigued that on the HTTP side, it didn't require SAML for that protocol to do the authentication with Active Directory. No additional infrastructure to maintain. And then there's this point about consulting support. So when I talk to other vendors or other solutions, in general, it was buy some software, and oh, by the way, there's also this consulting project you need to add on because you probably can't figure out our product by yourself. So even though that would be fine as a one-time expense, the reality is you would do that consulting project, and if you could then stay with it and do that as your day job, you probably could be an expert and learn it for all time. But in my case, I don't have a big team of people that are doing all this basis work. It's effectively me. So I couldn't really do that as a day job and a night job. So we initiated an evaluation of the CyberSafe TrustBroker products. That was, I think, March of this year. So with any good software evaluation, the first thing you probably need to do is install something. The particular products that we are evaluating on the TrustBroker side is called One Credential, and the other one's called Secure Client. So you have the HTTP website, and then the kind of the thick client side with the GUI and EasyDMS and WinShuttle, now that I've learned about that one in the last few months since we bought it. Both of these are based on the Kerberos product, so obviously getting away from NTLM. So you move into the installation. It's fairly typical. I'll run through a couple of these points, but at the end of the day, you're installing Windows software, an add-on to an ABAP stack, some S&C profile parameters for your basis people out there. But one point to mention there's a need to create objects in your Active Directory environment to support the Kerberos protocol and the handshake between the client and the back end. So one of the things you a lesson learned here is to work with your domain team, effectively have a good relationship with them so that they'll delegate the authority to the basis team so that you can do these installs and the configuration sort of on your own instead of constantly having a back and forth with them as you do installs. On the client side, again, standard installation for your MSI package that CyberSafe provides. A few registry settings you can set that dictate not only kind of logging and debugging stuff that you might need to troubleshoot things, but also to dictate if certain classes of users, let's say HR for example, if you want to have these people always prompt for a password versus having single sign-on, you can set some registry values to have it do that. Enhancement that they're working on and may be generally available, if not by now, maybe in the next month or so, is kind of flipping that back to the server side. And so instead of worrying about this machine being an HR person's machine and setting those registry values, you can kind of move that back to the ABAP system where you can say this user's role is HR and therefore that user will have to be entering a password and they can't use single sign-on. So still Kerberos based and you get all the security benefits of that, but you're prompting for passwords that are Active Directory. So from a picture perspective, to be kind of save 1,000 words here, you install the TrustBroker application on your ABAP system. On the left side, you have your thick clients, which is where the secure client will go. And on the right side, you have your HTTP web type protocols. So those scanners I talked about, you have maybe some tablets and browsers as well. Okay, testing. So in order to do some testing, we needed to have a system to test with. So in our case, we needed to convert from NTLM over to Kerberos with CyberSafe. So you can either install and stand up a brand new system to do some tire kicking with. In our case, we used our sandbox ERP environment. So we had a few users that were actually in there at that point. So we had to ask them to apologize, to take their SSO away with NTLM and give them passwords while we did some of the tire kicking for a few weeks. And then we also need to identify people to do testing. One of the big expectations to set, though, is since we're talking about shop floor people and these handheld devices, and I kind of think I should have brought one with me just to make it more tangible for everybody, but these things are a little bit hard to work with in general, but specifically when you're trying to test authentication and you're dealing with someone maybe in Australia or another country where you can't physically see it, if you can't get one on your own, set the expectation with these people, they're going to be taking pictures. So if you have a problem, send me a picture of exactly what you went through with your process to troubleshoot any issues. I would definitely stress you want to have a global representation of their user base. I actually learned as part of this process that one of our plants holistically kind of said we don't want scanners anymore, we're going to use tablets. So they actually have HP Windows tablets that are joined to the Windows domain, which was an aha moment for me. Because not only are they using a different device, but because the user's authenticated to the tablet, they're going to actually get single sign-on. So that actually is a pretty exciting feature because if that kind of takes off, I have a feeling that will spread through the other plants so they can use a better way to use the application. And then, of course, you want to kind of get a little bit of an inventory list of what these devices that you have out there, because sometimes you have to go back to the manufacturer when you have browser issues and strange things start happening. So that's what we had. So here I am thinking I'm going to do some testing and make sure things actually work, and the CyberSafe product kind of does what they said it would do. Turns out, in the spirit of Halloween, we had some skeletons in our closet. So there's 5 things I'm going to talk about. And to me, this is kind of the meat of the takeaways for this whole session, hopefully for all of you, is that it's effectively need to look internally to make sure you don't have any issues to resolve before you start testing. So the first one is DNS reverse lookup. So for those of you that know even just a little bit about DNS, you'll appreciate that reverse lookup is a client-server protocol where you effectively have a client saying, give me an IP address for a particular host, and then turning right around and asking for a host name based on an IP address. Compare the two things, they should be equal if there's no funny business going on. So a lot of effectively commercial software like SAP, like CyberSafe are going to require that to work. So our domain folks that had set up the Cimpress domain at the top and these other domains for these business units at the bottom hadn't gotten that working. And I don't actually know that they even, realized that they needed to get it working. So here I come trying to install CyberSafe and do some testing, and things aren't working quite right. It's not installing correctly. So my first opportunity to engage the support side of the CyberSafe folks. So they obviously triaged the problem very quickly and gave a workaround so we can put a host file in place on the SAP server to get rid of the actual problem, but that's not a good solution, as most of you would appreciate. So this was a huge part for me because not only did they give a quick workaround so I could keep testing, but more importantly, they brought in a DNS expert from their team because they've got labs, to support any of the different customer, situations that are out there. So their product works, obviously, but they brought that person to a call with our DNS and domain folks, and it was a good 45-minute call where it almost put me to sleep, to be honest with you, because it was DNS, kind of level 5,000 college course that they were kind of debating back and forth. But in the end, the solution wasn't overly complicated. Delegating reverse lookup zones was the solution, but I guess I really wanted to stress the support that we got was pretty impressive, that I certainly didn't expect. Challenge number 2 of 5 is device challenges. So I keep going back to these darn scanners. At the end of the day, we had old stuff. They were running Windows CE version 5, came out in, I think, 2004. So you talk to the plant folks that are running, the IT folks that are running this stuff, and they all laugh and they say, gosh, it's old stuff, but nobody gives us the budget to work on it, so we're kind of stuck with it. Problem with that is that this old version that's no longer supported by Microsoft is actually leading to a problem that the browsers on there don't support HTML5 and JavaScript. The problem with that is the responsive logon screen that the CyberSafe product has when it tries to render and be responsive on these small devices versus a desktop doesn't render well. So that's problem 1 of the old devices. The other one is, since they're not joined to a domain, the product is going to try to do what's called HTTP negotiate and send back a 401 response to the browser. In this case, what's happening is the browser is, I guess I'll use a technical term, puking, and popping up a standard Windows dialog box to authenticate with AD credentials. The reality is that didn't do anything because the thing isn't joined to a domain in any sort of fashion. So you get this box, you type some information in, nothing happens. Then you get the CyberSafe prompt. Didn't render very well because of the browser, but it did work technically in terms of authenticating. So we have these issues with our old garbage at the end of the day. So again, engage the CyberSafe support folks. They triage the issue, and literally in just a few days, if not maybe a week, they recognize that not all the customers are going to have new stuff, and so they enhance their product to provide not only a non-HTML5 version, so a very simple logon and password type of a page that doesn't have that responsive design, but more importantly, they also added a parameter on their URLs that allows you to have to turn off that HTTP negotiate. And just as a more of a technical aside, the HTTP negotiate is I guess that's the formal technical term for the single sign-on approach. SAP calls it SP Nego, and you may hear Microsoft calling it integrated Windows authentication. So there's a lot of words that mean exactly the same thing, but it's all about single sign-on with domains and web clients. So the parameter effectively allows you to turn it off. So if you have devices like those tablets that we had that are going to be joined to the domain, they can use that protocol, get single sign-on. And on the other side, you've got these devices that are not joined, turn it off, and everybody's good. So, challenge number 3 of 5, SSL certificate stuff. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because it really doesn't have much to do with kind of the product and the implementation, but it is still certainly something you can't ignore. So if you're going to start prompting for Active Directory credentials, you definitely want to have that be over HTTPS because you don't want it to be in clear text. Again, there's a little bit of kind of sausage making down in the details here, but these devices, these scanners aren't managed at the end of the day, so we don't have a way to push out certificates and CAs and new URLs and everything. So if we didn't do anything, the browser on this little device would start popping up and saying, do you trust this site and all that business. They can ignore it and go through, but it's not a good user experience. So we'll have to work with the IT people at the plants to do a little bit of automation if they can, but at the end of the day, they got to touch these devices to roll out SSL and make that a little more user-friendly. Challenge number 4. So in the warehouse management transaction, I think it's LM00, I guess because of the mobile nature of warehouse management in general, they're probably doing inventory and walking around a plant, Wi-Fi connections, things drop from time to time. So it does an additional, I guess, checking to make sure you don't have any sessions. So if it finds that you've already been logged on, the native application, I guess you could call it, would prompt and say, hey, we already see you. Would you like to cancel your existing session and try again? The CyberSafe product, once we turned it on in that environment, is inserted at the beginning of that authentication stack, and so there's no chance to hit the LM00 part to track those sessions. So effectively, the users were stuck when we're doing the implementation. So again, go back to the CyberSafe support folks, and they enhance their product again to handle that that use case as well. So the fifth challenge, and this is by far, if you haven't been able to take anything away from this entire presentation, by far this is the thing to wake up and pay attention to. Because if you are ever going to change from one single sign-on or any kind of, I guess, security library to another one, this is by far the kind of worth its weight in gold, at least in my opinion anyway. So the big issue here is big bang deployment. You've got service software, you've got client software, you've got an ABAP system from dev all the way to production, you've got clients all over the world. It takes a little while to roll this stuff out. You can't just snap your fingers and everything works perfectly. So there's a CyberSafe again, when I kind of raise this concern, like how am I going to do this on a Friday night, just to make sure, all of a sudden flip the switch and everything's going to get converted over. They referred me to a particular OSS note. So we're going to go into that on the next slide, kind of a step-by-step on how it technically works. But again, under the lesson learned to throw at you guys is, in our environment, the SAP GUI version wasn't up to patch level 10 of 730. And so, unfortunately, this note doesn't apply until you're at least on that level. So to keep that in mind. And you'll see later on how we have to upgrade our SAP GUI in order to take advantage of that. So here comes the kind of excellent sausage making, to use that phrase again, about how this works. So you start out with your landscape of an ABAP system dev, however many you have, all the way up to production, and your GUI clients. And they have the SNC. In our case, we have NTLM, just to remind you, and we're going to move to Kerberos. So you have the parameter, there's a few of them, but the one to mention here anyway is the identity parameter. It tells the NTLM protocol, or the SNC libraries, I should say, what the name or what the identity of the system is. So that's a profile parameter, and you also have on everybody's user master screen, you have a SNC name. I don't know if you're familiar, if you're running the SSO, you should know about that. But you may be able to tell from the screen there that's an NTLM formatted SNC name. So that's kind of as is. Start the process. First thing you do is roll out environment variables to all of your clients. And so there's one that, if you've ever dealt with SNC, you may have already heard of SNC_lib, but this OSS node and this functionality introduces a new one called SNC_lib_2. Super exciting, I know. But at the end of the day, you've got your NTLM library as your primary one, and then your new one, in this case, CyberSafe or Kerberos for us. So again, nothing's changed on your server side, you're just rolling out environment variables. I should also clarify, you would need to install CyberSafe on your clients as well. Mind a little detail there. So, step 2, as you start to roll out the product in Kerberos and CyberSafe on your landscape, you need to update that identity profile parameter to be Kerberos formatted. And the magic of this OSS note is this, I guess I'll call it the slash letters, if you will. So you have, in this case, /kerb5. And so what happens is when the client or the GUI makes a connection to the server, the SNC protocol is enabled, and the slash concept says, I'm going to, being the server side, I want to use Kerberos. The client side has already interrogated those two libraries that you're pointing it to. It knows one's NTLM, and knows the other one's Kerberos, and there you go. This particular server that we put CyberSafe or Kerberos on will obviously work then for SSO on that particular workstation. Whereas we haven't changed the production side at all yet. In addition to changing the profile parameter, you have to do kind of a mass update of your user master records. We wrote an ECAT script for that. So we move it from the NTLM format over to Kerberos. So, like I said, the most important thing to take away on step 2 here is that we've touched the development system, we've touched the clients, but we haven't touched any test systems or any production systems whatsoever. You might have the question though, this slash parameter, how is that working? Because on production I don't have the slash parameter. So because SNC lib is the primary library, it it will effectively use that when the server doesn't tell it what to use. So, and then as a final step, once everything's rolled out and clean, we will do a cleanup step effectively to kind of remove this kind of, I guess, parallel concept in place and just stick with the SNC lib pointing to the Kerberos library. So there is certainly time. We've only got another maybe 1 or 2 slides left, but it may be a good point. There's not a ton of people in the room to have a huge number of tangents, but maybe I can do a pause here. Does anybody have any questions about this kind of this process, this 3-step process here for how to have parallel libraries? All right, good. So after going through all of that and testing out all the functionality and all the use cases, we decided to move forward with CyberSafe. Key points to the reasons that we made this decision. The customer support was beyond any expectation I would have ever had. I've done a lot of software evaluation over the years, and by far they were the most helpful in terms of not only solving the problems, but taking it to the next level of helping me solve problems I didn't even know I had yet. They obviously enhanced their product given our old garbage and enhanced their product to accommodate that, which is pretty impressive. And in fact, they didn't sell us any consulting work, and the support side obviously came in and solved problems and educated me quite a bit. And in general, I definitely feel that I have more of a partner. So I'm not just buying a piece of software, I'm buying really a relationship to help me as the business changes and new things come out from SAP. I feel comfortable to be able to reach out to them and saying, hey, I have this new use case, can you help me out? What do I need to do? What do I need to do here? So that was the journey, just to identify the problems, kind of find a solution and make a purchase of a particular piece of software. But then we have to actually go roll it out now. So before you panic and think I'm going to go through every detail on this slide, the thing I really wanted to highlight is really the middle section here. The actual rollout of the CyberSafe or whatever product that you may use isn't too terribly complicated. You do the stuff we just showed on the slide before. It's not that complicated. It's low complexity, a couple of months and you're done. In our environment, unfortunately, we have this minor problem that we need to roll out a new GUI, which brings in new problems because our our desktop folks have a new SCCM infrastructure they want us to use. I see some smiles out there. It's an interesting process to go through, but point being, time. That's the end result of that drama. Need to get it working with other applications, so Easy DMS, Windshuttle, and then that whole SSL drama with getting not only the SSL URL stood up, but all the certificates pushed out to those little devices. So that's kind of a plan. So I guess here we are, mid-October, we're probably kind of halfway done with this at this point. So believe it or not, that is the end from a presentation perspective. We can definitely open it up for Q&A. There's a couple of folks. Tim Alsop is here from CyberSafe, because what I tend to observe is, even though I'm certainly nowhere near an authentication expert, after going through this process, the individual use cases that come up at customer sites is really crazy. So it's a good thing that Tim's here to help keep me honest. But we do have 2 networking sessions, so we'll have a bunch of customers come out and just basically do a bunch of brainstorming about situations and use cases and all kinds of things that hopefully you could learn from. There's 2, both in Lounge 6 down on the show floor. CyberSafe's at booth 112, and I think I would be formally shot if I didn't request that you fill out the session evaluation, if you don't mind. So, questions? And that's where Tim will answer. So, question, yes?
Installation of the software, do you require any kind of mapping, like a set scan on the domain controller to communicate with it that's specific to CyberSafe? Because you were talking about how you had to work hand in hand with the domain controller group, or the domain controller group. If all domain controllers, for instance, are considered like their own Kerberos domain controller, they often grant that ticket. Is there anything outside of that we need to be considering?
I would say, in a quick and dirty answer, I'll give you the short answer from my perspective, and Tim can correct me if I get it wrong. The answer is, I would say no. So do you need anything inside of Active Directory to make it all work? Effectively, it's an OU where the CyberSafe product will create a computer object that is effectively the identity of your SAP system. So high level, no, but that may be a more technical answer.
Just additional information, the Active Directory computer account that's created is actually created so that each of your SAP application server instances have an identity in AD. So every time you roll out the software on your application server, you need to create an identity in the Active Directory domain. And for those of you who are familiar with Kerberos, that involves creating something called a key table. So the key table on the server, the SAP server, is created in AD, and it's mapped to an Active Directory computer account object. And the thing that we've got in our product, which is something Eric referred to in his presentation, is the capability where the Active Directory admin can create an organizational unit and grant the organizational unit to basis admins, so that basis admins can write computer accounts into that OU. And what that means is that the AD person or AD team can do that setup once, and then from that point on, people like Eric and other people in the basis team can actually create key tables on the application server instances whenever they need to, at their own leisure. Obviously subject to change control, but they don't need to ask the AD team to help because they've got the credentials and they've got the access to be able to create computer accounts in that OU. And that's something that a lot of our customers really like, because it's a real pain sometimes if you've got to ask the AD team to do something, and it just adds extra delay, makes things that are relatively simple and but important take a lot longer than they should do.
Maybe as an additional piece of information too, if the AD or the domain folks are maybe aren't comfortable with that, I have a feeling that if you had one conference call with CyberSafe on it, they would become comfortable pretty quickly. So. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah, I think from a relationship with the AD folks, I have sort of a luxury. I've been at Cimpress or Vistaprint for quite a while, and I know the domain folks, if you will. But I know in larger environments where the domain people are a very separate team, kind of on an island somewhere, it can be hard. So I guess I'd say tap into CyberSafe, because they've got not only can they speak the lingo that the domain folks understand, but that creates a level of trust that they can have in the product that you're using to stick stuff in their world effectively.
Yeah, some of our customers actually have not only a separate team, but sometimes a separate company that actually look after their Active Directory domain. So that creates additional issues, because there's actually an approval process that needs to go in place every time a key table is created.
Other comments or questions? For those of you that have used NTLM, did I scare you enough to move away from it?
A few smiles. Yeah, I think so.
It was certainly news to me to see how bad that was.
Two more questions.
I just had a question on handhelds. You said you're using a web client to log into
A browser, yep.
Web browser.
Yep, yep.
I guess, so how is the handheld then being authenticated? It's single sign-on, right? So there's no user password thing.
So it's not so much single sign-on. So yeah, I'm glad you asked the question. So basically, how is the authentication happening from the handheld scanners, because they didn't authenticate on the scanner? So how is single sign-on working? I may have had a tendency to breeze through that little detail point. So it's not so much single sign-on that you're going to get, because they're not domain joined. I guess I might use the word simplified sign-on. So instead of having an SAP ID and password, they're going to have an Active Directory password. So they're still going to have the need to either punch in on the little device their ID and password. It's not a perfect solution in terms of the user experience being awesome, but it is way better than having to manage passwords. And then I don't know if you know this already, but on the SAP side, it's not very graceful when those expirations happen, when you don't get any warnings effectively. So it'll expire and boom, you have to change it right then.
Yeah, when the user's authenticated through the mobile browser, this would apply not just to scanners, but anything like a smartphone, a tablet, or even a desktop. There's a cookie that's created, and that cookie is then presented back to the server for subsequent page access, so that the user doesn't have to re-authenticate. And that's quite common in browser-based single sign-on scenarios. I don't think Eric's aware of this, but for another customer, we've actually just recently made an enhancement to our product, because they wanted that cookie to actually last longer than normal, because normally that cookie has a lifetime of 8 hours. We've made it so that you can configure the lifetime of the cookie, and you can even make the cookie persistent if you want to, so it survives browser refresh, browser reloads, or device reboots. That means the user can authenticate, potentially, and when they've authenticated, the cookie might last a week, and they could reboot the browser, they could reboot the device, and that cookie will still stay there, it'll persist, and next time they open up the device and point to the application URL, they'll get logged in without seeing a sign-on screen. So that's a different way of doing single sign-on.
Where are you storing the tickets being generated on the server? Are they stored in a specific directory, specific to CyberSafe?
What tickets? Oh, I see. Yeah, you're talking about when the application server starts up, it authenticates with AD. Yes. We store it in memory, in the work process memory. So each SAP work process on an ABAP stack, as you know, there's sometimes people have 20 or 30 of them. Each one of those processes has its own memory allocated, and that's where the credentials are stored. So when the work process restarts, the credentials are destroyed. So it's not stored in /temp as it would be if you were using something like an open source Kerberos library. I think that's where you're coming from the conversation we had earlier. Yeah.
When you just by restarting SAP, then you're picking up your single sign-on at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, the application server, when it starts, is actually authenticating with Active Directory. And the reason why that happens is because SAP itself can initiate an SNC connection to another SAP system, ABAP to ABAP or ABAP to something else over SNC. In the case of SAP GUI logon, that isn't needed because in that case, the workstation is initiating the connection to the server. So we've actually got a feature in our product which actually turns off that server-side authentication. So, and that was added to the product because we have people who have SAP application servers running in a private cloud where the actual server doesn't have access to the domain controllers. So you can still log on from a workstation inside your company to the SAP system in the cloud, but when the cloud SAP system is restarted, it doesn't need to make contact with AD.
So that since you're using Kerberos, are you able to do multi-domain calls?
Yes.
I guess the CyberSafe then kind of translate that trust. So you had people potentially, at his point, he had most people on workstations or tablets, but they had the warehouses that had scanners that have no domain connection with that.
Yeah.
So
For singles, just to reiterate your question, you're asking about how the product supports multiple domains and complex domain architectures. I think in the case of Cimpress, it didn't become a problem for him. The reason for that is that our product supports all of the standards available in the IETF to do with Kerberos and cross-domain authentication, cross-realm tickets. So what that means to the implementer is that you install the software on your SAP servers and you create an identity in a chosen domain. That domain could be a single domain or it could be multiple domains. You can actually create an identity in multiple Active Directory domains if you want to, and that decision will be based on what level of trust you've got between your domain controllers. Some of our customers don't have trust between the domains, or they've got trust in the wrong direction and they don't want to have make use of the trust, but if the trust is there, it works. So we support Active Directory domains on their own, Active Directory forests with subdomains and forests. We support forest trust, transitive trust, non-transitive trust. All those trust mechanisms are supported in our product out of the box, and it's something that you don't really need to know exists. You just install the product and it just works when the user logs in. There's no configuration required.
Good. And feel free if, obviously we have the networking sessions coming up in just a few minutes, but even if you don't attend those and you have a question down the road, if you take this back and start implementing, feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions or follow-ups. So, good. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.